over 60% in 3 consecutive seasons on your player props. You would have been up over $3,000 this past year, 2025, if you were a $100 player prop better with Tom's best bets.
Having fantasy points data at my fingertips makes the process a little bit easier. A lot of times we're looking at, what kind of coverage they're facing. Cover 4, we can clear that out. So we need to get some of these filters back in there. So we can do minimum routes run again. Yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Shocker. 6.07 yards per route run against this coverage. It is very helpful, and this is probably one of the tools that I use the most. Just trying to figure out what kind of coverages and what kind of defenses teams could be potentially seeing that week. So a player that, say, is better against man coverage, and they happen to be going against the Lions or the Giants or Broncos that week, they should get a little bit of boost.
Tom, you're not really reinventing the wheel here. We just give you the tools to do all of this stuff. You've come up with a process, and you want to show how you use fantasy points data and how the listeners, the watchers here on YouTube and the Fantasy Points Betting YouTube channel might be able to get the best out of fantasy points data for their own processes. Now look, everybody, the 2025 NFL season, yes, is over, but there are already things that you can bet on. Futures, combine, NFL draft, even the UFL will be covered at Fantasy Points. If you bet with Tom Brawley, our betting expert, you were up about 31 units on his player props in 2025. If you order a Fantasy Pro or Fantasy Bundle subscription from now until April 1st, 2026, you will get our in-season betting package as an add-on. YouTube watchers, well, you can see the code right on screen. So make sure you get in between now and April 1st for a big discount on the Fantasy Pro or Fantasy Bundle subscription. One of the first things we're going to look at is the advanced passing tool. And it has all of our advanced passing stats, dozens of filters, and some of your favorites are quarterback pressure, blitz, coverage scheme, middle of the field look, all of this stuff. There was a huge emphasis on middle of the field looks here and how that's affecting the passing game in the NFL. We've had all that stuff up at Fantasy Points Data for years, and you're showing all of the different filters that you can go through.
Yeah, the defense filters are very critical whenever we're looking at player props. So obviously, if a team is likes to blitz a lot, like the Minnesota Vikings, maybe we'll click that on and see how teams are, see how players are faring against the blitz. It might give us a better idea if maybe we should be fading the player that hates the blitz, or a player that does well against the blitz. So
look at Drake May.
Drake May, he's doing pretty well against the blitz here, but we have a bunch of different filters that we can go through. Blitzed is obviously one of them. Coverage scheme. If a team likes to play a lot of man coverage, we can click that on and filter that as well. So great way to kind of break down just how a quarterback performs against certain looks, against certain coverages. We even break it down, as you said, the middle of the field look. If a defense likes to play too high safeties a lot, which has become one of the bigger trends in the NFL recently. Let's see how a quarterback fares against those. So,
and by the way, we break this down on the play level. So, for instance, you might have seen Tom scroll past a filter that said tied or leading or trailing. And that doesn't just mean that it'll filter out games that the team won or lost. It will filter if the play happened when a team was trailing or leading the game, whether or not they ended up winning or losing that game. So if you want to do a quarterback or a receiver stat when they're behind in a game that you expect them to lose, you'll be very easily able to see which players are producing the most in those situations. And then, Tom, one of the really advanced ones that we have here, this is something we recently launched on the data suite just before the 2025 season, was the quarterback coverage matchup tool, which breaks down the week's matchup by expected fantasy points per dropback and by coverage grade of the tendencies of the defenses that they are playing and what matchup they have. So you're showing here, this is
Week 1.
This will be for the upcoming. I think this is for just week 1 of the 2025 season.
Yes.
Just for instance, you can adjust that per week, so it will adjust for the schedule. And as you'll see here, it was a particularly good matchup for Josh Allen by expected fantasy points per dropback. If Tom scrolls to that, so a pair against the coverages that Baltimore plays the most. Josh Allen averaged basically a half a fantasy point per dropback, which is fantastic. And then, of course, you can reverse sort that as well. Ryan Heath does a great job with this. So does Nick Spinola, and they do a lot of our DFS content at Fantasy Points as well.
Yeah, and I think this is honestly, this is a great starting point if for my research, especially for quarterbacks. Maybe I would start here before I get into the advanced passing. This gives you an idea of who might have a really strong matchup. We're able to break it down by coverage grade as well, and just to see. I think this is a good starting point. Like, okay, Drake May doesn't do well against these coverages from the Raiders, so maybe this could be a negative matchup. And this is for week 1, but if it's the middle of the season and he's been playing really well and his props are starting to drift up, and maybe we look to a little under here because of the coverage matchup grade. And this is a good starting point to highlight some, go in there, see who might, who's a little higher than expected, who's a little bit lower than expected. And, it's a good jumping off point for looking at player props.
And by the way, we have like a legend for all of this stuff. So if you're a little bit confused about what some of this stuff means, don't worry. You can always hover over and we will explain the process to you. Tom, we have advanced rushing tools, including missed tackles forced per attempt, yards before contact per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. And we break them all down by man gap concepts, zone concepts, and you're able to then and then filter by what these teams are doing from a concept perspective and how defenses defend particular concepts.
Yeah, this is another great way to see who's playing well against certain looks, and this is an overall leaderboard. So I haven't really showed you. We can break down little qualifiers. So since we have the full season complete, we can maybe break it down to all guys that have 100 rushing attempts on the season. So it filters it down even more. So we got 49 players that have reached 100 rushing attempts in the 2025
that's
season.
Not surprising. Devon Achane
had
the highest explosive run percentage, which is runs of 15 or more yards, by the way.
Yes, that's how we define explosive run. But we can see yards after contact. Bijan Robinson, excellent. And we can also see the opposite way here, 1.67. But as you said, sometimes these zone concepts, we can take a look at who's very successful against zone concepts and man gap concepts, and then we can use some of our other tools to see what teams are potentially struggling in those areas. So great way to get a start with the tool here. We have so many data points here, and a lot of this is from our guys that are watching film, breaking down who's missing, forcing missed tackles and when guys are getting contacted. So a lot of proprietary information going into these stat boards. So really good information here to see who's playing well and who isn't in the advanced rushing stats.
This might be more of a fantasy football tool, but Scott Barrett uses the bell cow report. We have actually defined bell cow at Fantasy Points, and we have the bell cow report, which basically shows you exactly how much a running back is being used in snap share, third down, red zone stuff, and you can see if a guy is trending up or down by kind of filtering through the weeks. You can also split this out by week, so you could see a guy's usage here. So for instance, we can just break it down into week 16 and see who got the most opportunities, who got the highest snap share, and you can sort by all of that stuff. Probably more useful as a fantasy football tool, Tom, but I guess there's an opportunity where you can say, the books might not have this line correctly because, man, I know this rookie, because I'm looking at the bell cow report, has been playing significantly more snaps in recent weeks, even if the box score hasn't reflected it.
Yeah, this is a great spot. I look at the bell cow report every week just to see how many snaps guys are playing, and if there is maybe a reason why somebody's trending down or trending up. And sometimes this really helps out. I'm looking at that rushing yards, a prop that I bet quite a couple of times in the middle to the late part of the season was Brian Robinson. And he was starting to get a few more carries per week, but his rushing yards prop was still sitting like 20.5 when it should have been, drifting up a little bit. It should have been in the mid 20s or high 20s. And we were able to pick off some because I was going through the bell cow report here, seeing that, it wasn't a whole lot of extra carries, but when we're betting these props on the very low end, getting an extra carry or two could be the difference here on getting over a prop that's lined at like 20.5 yards or something. And this is also a great way we can check out who's running more routes. So if there's a back that you like as a potential receiver, we can see, LaQuint Allen is, running, ran 10 routes last week, and maybe that's trending up or down, and that can point us in the right direction. So this bell cow report, it's pretty basic in the grand scheme of things, but it kind of gives you, we're able to dig in to see if there's a player that is starting to see more playing time, or maybe a guy that's starting to trend the other direction.
A lot of our kind of advanced passing tools, well, they have an analog in the advanced receiving tools. And some of the key stats that we really like are, in addition to what I said from advanced passing, average depth of target, the middle of the field look against a certain coverage scheme. But we also have yards per route run, targets per route run. And one of our statistics that we've actually found is pretty sticky with production is first read percentage. And look, I understand. We do not know what the play call is, and that always is going to limit what you can do as a film watcher and as a data charter. But you can see where the quarterback looks first with his eyes, Tom. And I think the numbers align very well there. With some of the leaders, obviously we have a Jacoby Keeney James in there. I've never even heard of him, but obviously we could just filter him out with a minimum snap share, minimum route share. And maybe a team that's got two really good receivers. Let's, for instance, say the Philadelphia Eagles in 2025. Two really good receivers, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Well, you can see how this is trending over the course of the weeks. A.J. Brown, I expected him to be the number one receiver for the Eagles, but Devontae Smith's first read rate, that's been trending up in recent weeks. A.J. Brown shouldn't have a line of 15 more receiving yards than Devontae Smith. There's a way to look at this, Tom, not just from a first read perspective, but a coverage scheme perspective. And once again, you can eventually break this out by week. So you could see on one page exactly what A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith's target share is every single week.
Advanced receiving, a lot of great pieces of information here. I use yards per route run, one of the best statistics out there for receivers. Targets per route run too. You'll see that a lot of times in the bets that I give out, especially if I'm looking at a player's receptions prop. So some of the filters, it's kind of like quarterback here. A lot of times we're looking at what kind of coverage they're facing. So we got different coverage schemes. If we're playing against a defense that likes to run a lot of cover 4, we can clear that out and look who's performing well against cover 4. There he is, Jacoby Jones, Theo Weiss. We need to get some of these filters back in there so we can do minimum routes run again. And there we go. So, yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Shocker. He's at the top of the yards per route run.
Look at how much he were led by.
6.07 yards per route run against this coverage. Jamar Chase, the next closest at 3.41 yards per route run. So, great way to go through. If there's a certain matchup, this team likes to run these types of coverages. A lot of times I'll filter through that and see if anybody that kind of stands out against those types of coverages. And once again, we can go through middle of the field looks, blitz looks. So, this is a great way to see which receivers are performing well against certain types of looks. So one of the best tools out there for really breaking down to see who has some great matchups coming up.
You know, obviously at Fantasy Points, we break it down much deeper than just man versus zone. But a lot of times you'll hear somebody talk about, we might say it on the radio show, oh, this team plays a lot of zone, so this is their favorite receiver against zone. Well, we actually gave you a much easier way to do that this year. We kind of simplified it, just who does well against man, who does well against zone. That's our receiving man versus zone tool.
Yes, so we get clean, easy. This is so easy to go through. We do have the overall numbers for yards per route run and targets per route run for every player, but we can do it by man, zone, single high, two high as well. And we can also still break it down. We're able to go by specific coverages again. So if you want to, this tool's makes it real easy. It's just the yards per route run and targets per route run on the main page here. So if that's all you're looking for, and a lot of times that is, but then you can still break it down by yards per route run. So we see Jackson Smith-Njigba again here, 6.07 yards per route run against coverage 4. That cover 4, that was what we saw in an advanced receiving. So this is a little easier tool to navigate if you want to go through, see what every player is doing against man, zone, and then we can still break it down by certain coverages.
We have an analog. We have a wide receiver tight end version of that, and it breaks down the week's matchup by expected fantasy points per dropback and by coverage grade, how a player does against their anticipated coverage for the week. So you don't even have to go in and do the research for the upcoming opponent. The Fantasy Points data suite has done that for you. This obviously is an in-season tool only.
Yeah, and we're looking at week 1 here. Shocker. Puka Nacua is at the expected fantasy points per route run rate here, 0.82. But we can break it down by coverage grade. So Juju Smith-Schuster is at the top here. Not too surprising. Juju didn't play a whole lot, but whenever he does play, he's a zone beater here, and he's going against the Los Angeles Chargers in week 1. 24% upgrade for him against those zone coverages. So a lot of times, you can break it down. If I'm looking at a specific team, I can just type in Patriots and Stephon Diggs against the Las Vegas Raiders. Maybe that is not such a great matchup. It's he's in the negative here in the coverage grade. So maybe we look to fade Stephon Diggs. Kayshon Boutte, on the other hand, gets a little bit of boost against cover 3. Which is what the Las Vegas likes to run a lot. So great way to see, even at the team level, who's looking better for the week and who's looking a little worse.
And just to explain these things here, Stephon Diggs, he averages a high expected fantasy points per route, higher than his teammates here, but the coverage grade means it's actually worse than his typical against that. So you can still see, for maybe fantasy, he's still a good start, but in terms of prop bets, you might want to shy away for that particular week. So it's really a good way to look at the difference between fantasy and prop betting using these really conveniently color-coded charts here at the Fantasy Points data suite. So again, you could still have a good game, but it'd be less than you're expected. So these are the kind of things we try to figure out with the Fantasy Points data suite. Now, Tom, we also have stuff on a team level. We have a coverage matrix for the defense. It breaks it down how often defenses are deploying coverages, as basic as man versus zone, down to the absolute rate of the specific coverages. Let me tell you something. This is a tool that it took me a while to really come to grips with, to be quite frank with you.
It's a lot of colors going on, a lot of numbers going on, but it is very helpful. And this is probably one of the tools that I use the most, just trying to figure out what kind of coverages and what kind of defenses teams could be potentially seeing that week. So as you can see here, Cleveland Browns, 39.5% man coverage, highest rate in the league. I think some people might be surprised that, the highest rate of man coverage, still less than 40%, but well above somebody at the bottom here like the Las Vegas Raiders at only 14.3%. So a lot of times when I'm starting my research for the week, I'll see who's playing man coverage the most and see who plays well against man coverage, and maybe a player will pop there. A lot of times, we can still go in here. We're going to see the Raiders at the top here. They weren't playing a lot of man coverage, but they do like to play a lot of cover 3. That is one of that is the most popular coverage that we'll see across the board here is cover 3. That is one of the most played around the league. So, but we can filter through all kinds of different ways here. And if you want to take it down, maybe you just want to, maybe a team was playing more man coverage in the beginning part of the season. Let's see what somebody's doing over the last 5 weeks of the season. If you want to take it, narrow down the area there. So, still, the Detroit Lions are at 44% there in man coverage, but great way to see what exactly a team might be going up against for the week, what coverages they should be seeing, and that's a good way to hone in. If there is a particular a player that, say, is better against man coverage, and they happen to be going against the Lions or the Giants or Broncos that week, they should get a little bit of boost, and this is where we start that process, seeing what defenses teams are playing each week.
All right, Tom, and obviously we might be burying the best for the last. There's people who say the games are won or lost in the trenches. Well, we have tools for that too. We have an offensive line versus defensive line tool. Eventually, we want to expand into individual offensive linemen, defensive linemen. But for now, we break down the differences in a team's run matchup versus their passing matchup, their pass blocking matchup. As you might see here, for instance, in week 1 of this season, we anticipated the Ravens would have success on the ground, or we would, this is kind of reverse engineered because these are 2025 numbers.
Yes.
But let's just say if the Ravens were to play the Bills this week, we would have the Ravens as having great success in terms of run blocking, but not so much success in terms of pass protection.
Yeah, as you can see here, they're averaging 3.15 adjusted yards before contact per attempt. Buffalo was giving up 2.44 adjusted yards before contact per attempt. So really strong matchup there. But as you said, the pass blocking grade, much lower here, would have come in 28th for the week here. Baltimore giving up a pass rush rate over expectation of 12.2%, and Buffalo giving at 6.38%. They're pressuring teams at 37.5%. So it's a major difference, but Baltimore clearly better in the offensive line, defensive line matchup here in the run game with their run blocking and Buffalo's run defense prowess. But Buffalo could get after the quarterback a little bit more. Baltimore's offensive line struggle a little bit more in that department. So good way to see who might have a good matchup. Maybe you're betting defensive player props, and you can see who has a really good pass grade, a negative pass grade here. Or if you're looking for a running back to have a potentially big game, here we go. Derrick Henry going against Buffalo Bills, the best rush grade for the week in week 1 last year. So another great spot here to start for the week and just kind of get some ideas brewing, jot them down. Might be some angles to potentially beat in the prop market.
So those are some of the many ways you can use the Fantasy Points data suite to basically increase your ability to at least know what's going on in the player prop market, the NFL games market, over-unders, whatever the case. We do the research for you, but you can do it yourself with the Fantasy Points data suite, and it's one of the many ways Fantasy Points gives you the best angles to exploit your sports betting. Please remember to subscribe to Fantasy Points Betting and the Fantasy Points Network across YouTube. Thank you for joining us. We hope to have you back soon.